Hey guys, short week this week since we're starting on a Tuesday and Friday, at least for my in-house kids, is basically a half day. But we will get through this section, the last section that you guys read uh, at the end of last week. We'll get through this today, tomorrow, review guide on Thursday, test on Friday, and we will actually start our next and last project for the marking period. So, this one, as you guys read before, was about William Penn. So we were looking at the natives and the first Europeans. Now we're looking at William Penn actually coming into PA. And as we always start with, let's look at the bell ringer. Number one, what do you think some of the problems of an early settlement in Philadelphia would be? If we can quickly just think of some of the issues they had in Roanoke or Jamestown, whether we're thinking about New England, there's a lot of problems in the quote unquote New World. So, what do you think maybe William Penn has to plan out? And you have to remember, all these people in all these different colonies, they're actually uh, planning these utopian societies. Like that, those are the words that they use to try to solve all these problems. Just like they're like a let's say 1600s, 1500s Elon Musk's. They are literally planning these things to a T, even where buildings are and the size of them, everything. So, what are some things that you predict that they're going to have to deal with and try to solve? Number two, what do you know about Quakers? So, probably not a lot of people know much, but I assume there's one stereotype that you're going to say because students say it every year. Other than that, leave that in comments on the stream. You've been doing a great job. Remember, you are allowed to comment on other people's. Only a few people have done that. Other than that, I almost always reply to each one. When you guys have kind of the same answers or very similar, I don't want to keep asking the same questions. So sometimes I might say see above or something like that. But I often or almost always reply to you. So I love it if you could reply back because a lot of times I ask you further questions. So that'd be awesome. Anyway, let's look at the objectives. So for today and tomorrow, we're going to discuss in general William Penn. We'll describe the start of Pennsylvania and explain Penn's government in Pennsylvania. That'll more so be tomorrow. Our key terms, which are not that many, just Quakers and the Great Law. Yep, that's it. Alrighty, let's look at this. So we can just quickly talk about the Penns, or more specifically, William Penn's father. He was an admiral in the British Navy, and he was a friend to King Charles II. In fact, he actually brought him back out of exile from France. King Charles' father was essentially fighting for the throne, and he lost. He lost to Parliament, and it was under a ruler that basically took control over Britain until he died, and that's when King Charles II would come back. Penn's father, who we'll just call Admiral Penn, he helped bring him back, and he even financed money for the war. The Penns were one of the richest families in Europe. They owned plenty of land, which was really saying something back then. They also owned land in Ireland, and they had plenty of power and connections. Because he loaned him that money later, as you guys know, that would come back to help William Penn when King Charles grants him Pennsylvania. Admiral Penn did loan him about 16,000 pounds. If you look at that in today's money, it's something close to like $5 million in our money, according to some currency calculators. About 1 pound is like $302. So he did owe him a lot. He never paid off Admiral Penn, but when Admiral Penn died later, all those debts, any money, any inheritance would go to William Penn, so he would get that. After giving you a brief background on the Penns, let's look at, well, the Quakers. First, they didn't actually call themselves the Quakers. They called themselves the Society of Friends. Quakers was more of a term used to describe them later and not by them. It was a Christian religion, but more specifically than Christianity, a Protestant religion. You have to think Christians. There are a lot of things. That's Amish, that's Quakers, that's Catholics, that's Mennonite, that's Huguenots, and I could keep going. So we'll just say Protestants, as in the Christian religions that protested against the Catholic Church. And they use the term friends uh, coming from a Bible verse, John 15, verse 14 and 15, which actually comes from Jesus. A lot of the Quaker, let's say, philosophies come from the Gospels of Jesus. So it's not necessarily like Old Testament. It's a lot of Jesus-based scripture. So you have to say that's a lot different for those of you that maybe went to church. When you look at the Old Testament God versus the New Testament God, Old Testament maybe being, destroying the planet, for instance, with Noah's Ark and a great flood, and the New Testament God, it's the same God, right, for Christians, but New Testament God, it's more like love your neighbor, turn the other cheek, this and that. When you look at the Old Testament, that's kind of a lot different. Anyhow, Quakers really pull from Jesus Christ. And this verse that I keep rambling on about, that basically sets their philosophy, is, "You are my friend. If you do what I command you, I shall not call you my servants anymore, because a servant does not know his master's business. I call you friends because I have made known to you everything I've learnt from my Father." So this is Jesus saying, like, you're not my servant. Like, we're friends. We're like equals. Maybe he's trying to play on, like, we're all God's children or something like that. But the Quakers take it that way, and that makes them kind of dangerous, especially because they take a more egalitarian approach to everything. There's not these hierarchies. You have to say that's dangerous for the social structure of the British at that time. You have your king, you have your dukes, you have your governors, your lords, those in parliament, you have your landlords, and so on. And then you have, you like your peasants, your farmers, your musicians. You have a hierarchy, and basically, if you're rich, poor, men, women, whatever you are, for Quakers, like, you're all the same. You're all friends. So as I said before, that can be dangerous to some of the norms, to some of the social structures. That can shake things up a bit. So they were kind of like religious outcasts. Now, the founder who would read this and basically break away from some of the mainstream religions, such as the Anglicans, would be George Fox. He was tired of the church and just organized Christianity and organized religion in general. He would basically say, you can dress however you want, you can do whatever you want within reason, but, like, let's follow Christ. Let's follow these verses of the Bible, and we'll break away from the church, because you don't really need a church. It's between God, it's between you, and that's it. You don't need all these other people. You don't need to do all these other fancy things. Like, that's it. Now, Fox and the other friends, they definitely focused on their deeds, and this is a big, I guess, argument between many Catholics and Protestants as well. Many Protestants saying, it's based on your faith. Many Catholics saying it's based on your deeds, or faith and deeds. And they both kind of agree on the same thing, but they just say it's different. So Quakers were more focused on what you did. And they point to a verse in Matthew that basically says, heaven will be open to those that do the will of God, not just say things. You can't just show up. You can't say something nice. You actually have to do it. So they were very very big on not just preaching, let's say, equality or peace or social justice. They were big about actually doing things. In fact, even George Washington, who would later be our first president, he would say that Quakers were actually the most useful citizens. They were extremely involved. They were fair. They were peaceful. As I said before, egalitarian. They tried to provide opportunities and equal opportunities. It didn't matter what you were. They provided education, and their education, as I'll talk about later, wasn't just learning things. It was also getting hands-on work. It was as if you get some sort of, let's say, liberal education in humanities, something like that, in addition to learning trades and other skills. So it's like the best of both worlds, which is extremely awesome, I think. They also were involved in prison reform, and they're even some of the first earliest abolitionists. But some Quakers did have slaves. Even William Penn had, I believe, 3 slaves. So there's a contradiction there. As I notice, as I note in the last bullet point, they did focus on peace, equality, an individual relationship with God. You don't need this big church or big congregation. It's between you and God. They were also big on reflection, big on studying, whether it's, as I said before, the Bible or history or philosophy, or even learning trades and skills. They were big on all that. They're big on prayer, they're big on faithfulness, and even service. They're not just talkers, they're doers. They actually get their hands dirty and know they'll do the work. If they're saying something, like, they're going to do it. Now, I'm almost done talking about Quakers, I promise, and we'll get into William Penn. Some of the stereotypes you may have on Quakers, this would be George Fox, by the way, might be them being very peaceful, which was true. But they were also, they lived simply, they were very gracious, they were for peace, but they're also for truth. And when you're for truth, and you're not just for, like, telling the truth, you're for enacting the truth, you're for enacting justice, for being, a vigilant citizen, which I think you all should be. Sometimes it goes beyond just saying something. So the Quakers were very stern, very proper, they were calm, they were self-disciplined, but in the mid-1600s, they were kind of like rebels. You have to see that there were so many problems in England, the poor problem, everything, how they're treated, the hierarchies. You have over 200 laws punishable by death. This, really pissed off the Quakers. They were mad. They didn't think it was right. They did not think it followed the truth. So they would just march into churches. They'd denounce ministers. They'd say, you're dumb dogs. Quakers would never swear oaths. They would not, like, bow or tip their hat to anybody, because they all felt that they were equal. So, if you're a poor person, cool, we're equal. If you're a lord, a land holder, cool, we're equal. If you're a big time merchant, cool, we're equal. If you're the king, cool, we're equal. If you're the pope, cool, we're equal. None of that stuff mattered to them. Status did not matter to them. They would not get starstruck. If you were a good person and you followed what they thought to be true, and you were an extremely rich business owner, cool, that's fine. Now, if you were corrupt, that would not be okay. So I think that's a super healthy way to live, for sure. So you can say that they were really shaking things up in England, and kind of making a lot of people mad, and sometimes the wrong people, like, for instance, the king. They also opposed war, which you have to think every country, every culture throughout time kind of always demonizes the enemy and tries to justify war. Sometimes it is justified, sometimes it's not, but they were always against war. So whether it was for a good reason or not, Quakers always opposed it, and that typically always makes the government mad. At this point, the king. They also gave women the right to speak at public meetings and tried to, again, be egalitarian, try to give equal opportunities. And this kind of was like culture shock for some of the English as well. As I said before, too, they broke away from the church, which was a big deal. They thought, your way to salvation, your way to heaven, it's just between you and God, and it's nobody else's business. So you don't really need the church, and that's a problem, especially when the church was dominating societies back then. And you could still make the argument churches still dominate today. Now, these friends, what they would do would be to shake when they felt enthused religiously, and that's kind of how they became known as the Quakers, because they would actually, like, quake and shake. Sometimes people would say, they trembled before God, so meaning, like, they quake at God. And they have, like, the inner light inside them. They have God or the Holy Spirit, whatever you want to say, inside them, and that makes them quake. So about 15 minutes in, I'm almost done with the Quakers, I promise. In England and in several of the colonies, Quakers faced violent persecution. So they were treated differently. And that's not good. You have to think England has so many problems with the poor and all the people they're trying to send out, if you remember from our other lessons. The Quakers are one of them, and they're treated cruelly for a lot of different reasons, because they kind of cause waves in society, but that they're also like they also treat everybody equally, and that's kind of a problem in that kind of society when you literally have a guy that claims God put him on the throne and God speaks through him. You know what I'm getting at. Um, Around 15,000 Quakers were jailed just between 1660 to 1685. There's many accounts of them being publicly whipped, publicly lashed, sometimes quote unquote beat into a jelly. Sometimes they were branded with the letter H for heretic, basically meaning somebody outside of the norm, somebody outside of, back then would be like Anglican. So if you're not a part of the group, like, your religion's wrong. It's kind of very similar to where we get the term pagan, pagan meaning the people over the hill, or aka the people not abiding by the mainstream religion. So they would be branded, they would be beaten. Some were even executed in England, and some were even executed in the colonies. You have to think about that. So it's very dangerous for these people, and um, they have to find a safe haven. They have to find somewhere to go, and that's where William Penn comes in. So almost like every organized religion, they do have a community and they do meet. They would typically meet weekly or even monthly to discuss social evils, because they were not just about talking about things. It's not talk the talk, it's walking the walk. So they would actually do something about it. They were effective citizens. This is one of their, I guess, biggest strengths, and one of their biggest weaknesses. Not even a weakness in the sense of this would make people angry and make them lock them up. This would make them cause waves and become noticed, become under the microscope, and even be executed, because they were actually effective citizens that wanted to try to fix things and make things better, and they did, at a cost of sometimes people's lives. Many Quakers were also feminists. There's a whole spectrum of feminists that we talk about today. Whether you have radical feminists that just hate you if you're a guy, or if you have reasonable feminists that just basically want equality. Like, I would think that most people, by that definition, are feminists. But many Quakers were feminists. They wanted equality for men and women. Many Quakers were anti-slavers. They were the first abolitionists, as I said before. Although some Quakers did make a lot of money off slaves, and some even had them, such as William Penn. Now, this is what most people say when you looked at our bell ringer question before. What do you know about Quakers? This is kind of the image that pops into people's head, and they think that this is William Penn. Well, it's not actually. This would be, or even this guy. But this is what we typically get when we talk about Quakers. And just a quick fun fact, since in all your projects you gave so many fun facts, I will give you one. This Quaker man does not represent an actual person, and this came from the company. It's just a man, quote unquote, dressed in Quaker garb, chosen because the Quaker Faith Project projected the values of honesty, integrity, purity, and strength. Okay, they're big on that. Here was an illustration to some of the points I was making before about how dangerous it was to be a Quaker, and not even just a Quaker, just anything outside of the mainstream religion in England, which would be predominantly Anglican. So if that's not you, you run the risk of being whipped, into a jelly, right? You run the risk of being executed, not even just in England, even like New England, even in New York with even the Dutch for a time. You have to think, this is where we get the New England myth, religious tolerance. We're this people on a hill, the house on a hill. We are the exception. We're going to accept everybody, right? The Charlie Brown garbage. And then you get like these same people murdering Quakers a little bit later, and don't even get me started with the Salem witch trials, right? Like, this is what you get, these peaceful people. Yeah, they make people mad. They don't tip their hat off to people. Sometimes they yell at ministers because they're corrupt. So they do cause waves, but it doesn't mean you kill them because they worship the same God a different way. And we even have the Quakers. There's much more outside of these illustrations, but even banned outside of the Caribbean. So this is just wild. And where do you go? Well, let me get rid of that quick. Where do you go? Well, Pennsylvania, hopefully, right? And this is just an illustration of William Penn's vision. His vision being what he called the holy experiment. Again, all these people are trying to set up utopias. So they're trying to set up these ideal situations, take care of the problems there, take care of the people there, take care of the natives. So he thought, Quaker, not Quaker, Muslim, Catholic, Irish, Jewish, and he even did say like Muslims and Jews. They can come to this colony, they can all practice their religions, even with the natives, and we can all be brothers and love one another and take care of each other. So, this is a big deal. Will it work? Well, we'll find out. Alrighty, so this is going to be the last thing I go over for this video because it's kind of long, and we'll continue it more so tomorrow. But we'll talk about William Penn for a bit. So his father, as you guys know, was the admiral, close friend to King Charles, and this is not like not saying anything. This is a big deal. When the king owes another person something, you have to think of how kind of magnificent that is, because the king is in such a prestigious position, selected by God and so on, and owns everything, whatever. So if he's indebted to somebody, like, if he's doing favors for somebody, if somebody saved him, you have to think of how highly respected the admiral was. So now that carries down into William Penn, who kind of made the king mad kind of all the time. When William Penn was born in 1644, he attended school until he was 12. After that, he was tutored by private teachers until he attended Oxford. So this is when he would discover the Friends, and when he joined them, soon on he would be kicked out. You have to think, these people did cause waves because they told what they thought to be true, and people don't like that, even today. So they thought people were equal, doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, if you're fighting a war, it's always a bad war, doesn't matter. People don't respond well to that. Even now, if you were to treat people equally, sometimes they wouldn't like that, because, maybe you have to show more respect to me because I'm a teacher, or, a police officer, or elders, or so on. Maybe you have to talk a certain way to a little kid. If you treat everybody equally, I would think most people like that, but some people might not. If you oppose wars, go right now, go oppose some wars that we've been involved in, and you'll probably see very quickly that people really don't like that, because they believe that all the wars we've become involved in were for the right reasons. So there's just a quick real-world example today in modern times. People don't like that then, they're not going to like it now, and that gets them kicked out. So the law back then was that you had to follow the King's Church. So that would be the Church of England. That would be the Anglicans. The Anglicans are the Church of England. Now, if you were non-Anglican, you were not a part of the Church of England, you'd be persecuted. You would be treated different. You could be locked up. You could be beaten. At worst, you could be put to death. That was a real thing that could happen to you back then. So clearly, as I just said, William Penn didn't follow this. At 23, because of Oxford, he became a friend. And even though he came from a rich elite family, he was taken to jail many, many, many times. One time he was locked up for months. You have to think that's a big deal. Penn could have been put to death, but it seemed like, out of respect, King Charles II kind of would let him out or keep him alive because, that was one of his good friends that he owed son. Now, Penn's father didn't really want him to be a Quaker. He sent him to France several times as a kind of last-ditch effort to try to save him and change his ways. But it didn't help. It didn't stop anything. If anything, Penn's beliefs grew stronger, and his father kind of learned to accept that later on towards the end of his life. Penn's father also did talk to the king here and there about helping the young William. Young William was charming. He had a good relationship with the king, even though he made him angry all the time, and the king would lock him up. But it was almost like a sitcom type relationship that they did have. When Penn's father died, the king would take care of him. He left William Penn with the family land, all the debts owed. So that means that young William Penn would get money, he would get land, he would get a charter from the king to basically inhabit Pennsylvania. So the king would kind of knock out two birds with one stone. He'd take care of Penn as his father requested. He would pay off his debt, so he doesn't have that on his plate, and he would basically solve the Penn and the Quaker problem. You know, get out, go to that land, and now you're not my problem anymore. Something else he would solve would be just setting up a colony to either get rid of or help relations with the natives so that they're not a problem. They could be allies or they could be removed, whatever it is, whatever it works out. You know, he's 2,000 miles away. Why does he care? And another advantage is just having a colony in general, because by definition, they're there to essentially serve the motherland, right? So whatever resources, whatever trading it can do, whatever excess money or production, manufacturing, whatever, that can all go back to the king. So this is a pretty sweet deal for him and for him. And although he is granted land, which you can say that's weird that you're granted land for something 2,000 miles away, but I guess God told you so you can, even though people are living there, aka the Lenape. He is granted it, but William Penn does also pay for it from the Lenape too when he gets there. So when we come back, we will look at the voyage, and we'll look at the early colony and the government at that time. Okay, so this was quite a long one, but thanks for staying with me, and let me know if you have any questions, and please also answer the bell ringer in comments. Have a good one, guys. We'll finish this up tomorrow. Bye.